4 human beings are farther from Earth than anyone has been in over half a century. They are inside a spacecraft called Orion, hurtling past the moon at thousands of miles per hour. Today they are flying around the far side of the moon, losing all contact with mission control and traveling farther from home than any person in history. 4 days from now, they have to survive a re-entry so violent that their heat shield will hit temperatures of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. But here is what makes this mission even more intense. The last time NASA tested that heat shield, chunks of it cracked off and fell away during re-entry, and they decided to fly with it anyway. This is Artemis II, 10 days, 4 astronauts, 685,000 miles. And we are right in the middle of it. So let's break down everything that has happened, everything that is coming, and the one moment that has every engineer at NASA holding their breath. Before these 4 astronauts ever climbed into Orion, this mission nearly died on the ground about a dozen times. Artemis II was originally supposed to fly in 2023, then it slipped to September 2025. Then in December 2024, outgoing NASA Administrator Bill Nelson announced yet another delay, pushing it into early 2026. The reason for all the slipping was a problem that terrified engineers. When Artemis IV flew uncrewed in late 2022, the Orion capsule came back with visible damage to its AV coat heat shield. Chunks of the ablative material had cracked and separated during re-entry. This is the barrier between the crew and a 5,000-degree plasma fireball. You do not want that barrier falling apart. NASA spent over 2 years investigating. They ran thermal vacuum tests at facilities across the country. They modeled the heat distribution across the shield hundreds of times. And eventually, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman approved flying with the existing shield, but with one critical change. They eliminated the planned skip re-entry, where the capsule would bounce off the atmosphere like a stone skipping on water, and replaced it with a steeper, more direct descent to reduce how long the shield takes the worst of the heat. That decision may end up being the most important call of the entire Artemis program. Even after that was settled, the Space Launch System rocket itself kept throwing curveballs. A wet dress rehearsal in February revealed a liquid hydrogen leak and a problem with the crew module hatch valve. A second rehearsal on February 19th went clean. But 2 days later, engineers found a helium flow anomaly in the upper stage that forced NASA to roll the entire rocket back to the Vehicle Assembly Building on February 25th. The SLS did not return to Launch Complex 39B until March 20th, delayed an extra day because of high winds on the Florida coast. So when April 1st finally arrived, everyone was holding their breath. The weather forecast for Kennedy Space Center started at 80% favorable and climbed to 90% in the final hour before launch. 2 small issues popped up during the countdown. A flight termination system communication glitch between the range and the rocket was fixed by a controller who grabbed a piece of Heritage Space Shuttle-era equipment from the Vehicle Assembly Building. An elevated temperature reading on one of the launch abort system batteries turned out to be a faulty sensor. Neither delayed the clock by a single second. At 6:35 p.m. Eastern on April 1st, 2026, the most powerful rocket ever built for human spaceflight came to life. The 4 RS-25 engines, Heritage Space Shuttle main engines that have been flying since the 1980s, throttled up alongside 2 5-segment solid rocket boosters built by Northrop Grumman. Together, they produced 8.8 million pounds of thrust. To put that in perspective, that is 15% more power than Saturn V, the rocket that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon. The Space Launch System stands 322 feet tall and weighs 5.75 million pounds fully fueled. When those boosters ignite, people feel the vibration in their chest from miles away. The Space Launch System climbed into a partly cloudy Florida sky, and the roar rolled across the Space Coast like thunder. Over 10 million people watched the live stream, making it the most watched event in NASA history. NASA's YouTube channel alone peaked at 4 million concurrent viewers. An estimated 400,000 spectators packed the beaches and causeways of Florida's coast to see it in person. Watch parties erupted across the country, from the Cosmosphere in Kansas to Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. And just like that, for the first time since December 1972, humans were on their way to the moon. Sitting on top of all that fire and fury was the Orion spacecraft, a vehicle built specifically for deep space. The crew module, built by Lockheed Martin, is attached to a European service module designed and manufactured by Airbus for the European Space Agency, with contributions from 11 nations. That service module carries 33 engines total, 1 main engine for the big burns, 8 auxiliary engines, and 24 reaction control thrusters spread across 6 pods for fine maneuvering. 4 solar array wings stretching 62 feet across generate 11.2 kilowatts of power to keep everything running for the 10-day journey. This spacecraft was built to go farther than any crewed vehicle ever has, and it is doing exactly that right now. Now let's talk about the 4 people riding that rocket, because this crew is stacked with historic firsts. Commander Reid Wiseman is a retired Navy captain and former FA-18 Super Hornet pilot who flew 24 combat missions. He spent 165 days on the International Space Station in 2014 and later ran NASA's entire astronaut office before stepping back down to flight status for this mission. At 50 years old, he is now the oldest human to travel beyond low Earth orbit and the first person to command a lunar mission since Gene Cernan. Before boarding, he posted an Instagram photo with his 2 daughters, who insisted on taking a selfie with the rocket behind them. Pilot Victor Glover is also a Navy captain and test pilot with over 3,000 flight hours across more than 40 aircraft types. He piloted the first operational SpaceX Crew Dragon mission to the International Space Station in 2020 and completed 4 spacewalks. Born in Pomona, California, Glover is now the first person of color to fly beyond low Earth orbit. He has been refreshingly honest about what that means, saying he looks forward to a day when firsts like these do not need to be talked about anymore, and exploring space is just human history. Mission specialist Christina Koch holds the record for the longest single spaceflight by a woman at 328 consecutive days aboard the International Space Station. She participated in the first all-female spacewalk. Before becoming an astronaut, she spent 3.5 years working at polar research stations, including a winter at the South Pole where temperatures dropped to -111 degrees Fahrenheit. She is now the first woman to travel beyond low Earth orbit. From deep space, she reflected on seeing Earth at night and described the breathtaking combination of daylight on one side and moonlit glow on the other. Mission Specialist Jeremy Hansen is a Royal Canadian Air Force colonel and CF-18 fighter pilot selected by the Canadian Space Agency in 2009. Artemis II is his very first spaceflight. His debut mission is a trip around the moon. He is now the first non-American ever to venture into deep space. After the translunar injection burn sent them toward the moon, Hansen radioed back a message saying that humanity had shown what it was capable of, and that it was the world's hopes for the future carrying them on this journey. So what has actually happened since liftoff? Let's walk through it day by day. Flight Day 1 on April 1 was launch day. After the Space Launch System, SLS, put Orion into a high elliptical orbit about 5 times higher than the International Space Station, the crew had work to do immediately. The interim cryogenic propulsion stage fired twice to raise their orbit, and then pilot Glover conducted a proximity operations demonstration, manually maneuvering Orion near the spent upper stage for about 70 minutes. That was a first for the spacecraft, and a critical test for future missions that will require docking. Meanwhile, Koch and Hansen activated life support systems and set up exercise equipment inside the cabin. A brief communications dropout about 50 minutes after launch was resolved quickly. And in the mission's most relatable moment of the day, a toilet fault light started blinking. Koch fixed it herself and later said she was proud to call herself the Space Plumber. Flight Day 2 on April 2 was the big one. At 7:49 p.m. Eastern Time, the European Service Module main engine fired for 5 minutes and 50 seconds, accelerating Orion out of Earth orbit and onto a free return trajectory to the Moon. This was the translunar injection burn, the point of no return. For the first time in over 50 years, human beings were leaving Earth's neighborhood. The crew named their spacecraft Integrity. But the day was not completely smooth. A false cabin depressurization alarm sounded just before the burn. Hansen later said it definitely got the crew's attention. A water dispenser valve also malfunctioned, though the crew filled backup pouches and moved on. Flight Day 3 on April 3 delivered a surprise, but a good one. The first planned trajectory correction burn was canceled entirely. Orion's post-injection trajectory was so precise that no adjustment was needed. Orion program manager Howard Hughes said propellant consumption was running roughly 5% better than pre-flight models predicted. That is a significant margin on a mission where every pound of fuel could mean the difference between having options and not having options during an emergency. Commander Wiseman used the day to capture what became the mission's first iconic photograph, a backlit view of Earth showing auroras glowing at both poles and zodiacal light stretching across the frame. NASA titled the image, "Hello World." It instantly drew comparisons to the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise photo from 1968. Wiseman admitted the crew's windows were already smudged because they could not stop looking out. A minor burning smell inside the cabin was assessed as harmless mechanical off-gassing, a common occurrence in spacecraft during the first few days as materials adjust to the vacuum and temperature extremes of space. Flight Day 4 on April 4th was about proving the crew could fly the ship if the computers failed. Koch and Hansen took turns at the controls for a 41-minute manual piloting demonstration, testing 2 different thruster modes. This was the first time astronauts had manually piloted an Orion spacecraft in deep space. The crew also photographed sections of the moon's Orion tail basin, a 600-mile-wide impact crater straddling the near and far sides that had never before been seen with human eyes. Only robotic spacecraft had ever imaged it, but the day also brought the mission's most annoying recurring problem. A frozen urine vent line forced the crew onto backup waste devices. Mission Control had them reorient the entire spacecraft to let sunlight warm up the frozen line. And then came the moment that went viral. Commander Wiseman reported that Microsoft Outlook had crashed on the crew's scheduling laptop, telling Houston he had 2 copies of Outlook open and neither one was working. Mission Control remoted in and fixed it within an hour. The clip spread across every social media platform within minutes. Flight Day 5 was yesterday, April 5th. The crew woke at noon Eastern Time to CeeLo Green's Working Class Heroes. They received a message from Apollo 16 astronaut Charlie Duke, who reminded them that a photograph of his family still sits on the lunar surface waiting for someone to come find it again. Yesterday's main task was a full evaluation of the Orion crew survival system suits, including pressurization, leak checks, and mobility assessment. By the end of the day, Orion was approximately 65,000 miles from the moon and crossing into the lunar sphere of influence, where the moon's gravity became the dominant force pulling the spacecraft. All systems were nominal. Every major component was performing at or above expectations. And that brings us to right now. Today, Flight Day 6 on April 6th is the moment everything has been building toward. Orion is swinging around the far side of the moon at a closest approach of roughly 4,600 miles above the lunar surface. To give you a sense of scale, the International Space Station orbits Earth at about 250 miles. These 4 astronauts are 4,600 miles from the moon and over 252,000 miles from Earth. Nobody in history has ever been that far from home. During the flyby, the crew is experiencing a planned communications blackout lasting 30 to 50 minutes as the moon physically blocks all radio signals between them and Mission Control in Houston. For that half hour, they are completely alone. No voice contact, no telemetry, no data link. Just 4 human beings on the far side of the moon with nothing but their training and their spacecraft between them and the void. The last people to experience that kind of isolation were the Apollo astronauts more than 50 years ago. At approximately 1:45 p.m. Eastern today, they are expected to surpass the Apollo 13 distance record of 248,655 miles from Earth, reaching an estimated 252,000 miles or more. Apollo 13 set that record unintentionally during their emergency flyby in 1970, after an oxygen tank explosion forced them to loop around the moon instead of landing. Artemis II is breaking that record on purpose. The crew plans to photograph the lunar far side from closer than any human camera has ever captured it, and they are expected to attempt new Earthrise images as they come back around, recreating one of the most iconic photographs ever taken when Apollo 8 first captured Earth rising above the lunar horizon in December 1968. If you have been following this mission and want to stay up to date with every major space event, hit subscribe. We cover missions like this in depth so you never miss the moments that matter. After the flyby, flight days 7 through 9 cover the return trip. Orion exits the lunar sphere of influence and begins a roughly 4-day journey home. The crew will conduct return trajectory correction burns as needed, perform a second manual piloting demonstration with Wiseman and Glover at the controls, and practice building an emergency radiation shelter inside the cabin in case of a solar flare. On April 9th, the final full day in space, they will don compression garments to prepare their bodies for the return of gravity and stow everything for re-entry. A radio link with the International Space Station crew is also planned during the return leg. And then comes Flight Day 10, April 10th, the moment that keeps engineers up at night. The European service module separates and burns up in the atmosphere. Orion then hits the upper atmosphere at approximately 25,000 miles per hour. That makes it the fastest crewed re-entry ever attempted. The heat shield will endure temperatures up to 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Remember, this is the same type of shield that showed cracking and erosion after the uncrewed Artemis I mission. NASA's modified direct entry profile, without the skip re-entry, is designed to reduce how long the shield endures the most extreme thermal punishment. 2 drogue parachutes deploy at 25,000 feet above the Pacific Ocean. 3 massive main parachutes open at 9,500 feet. If everything works, splashdown happens at approximately 8:07 p.m. Eastern in the Pacific Ocean, about 50 miles off the coast of San Diego. The USS John P. Murtha and roughly 100 NASA recovery personnel will be waiting. 5 helium-inflated airbags will keep the capsule upright until divers reach the crew. So has everything gone to plan? Honestly, better than almost anyone expected. Not a single trajectory correction burn has been needed through the first 5 days of flight, meaning the translunar injection was remarkably precise. The European service module's propulsion, thermal control, and life support systems are all performing nominally. The minor anomalies, the toilet issues, the false depressurization alarm, the Outlook crash have all been manageable and, in some cases, hilariously human. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman summed it up pretty well when he said that after a brief 54-year intermission, NASA is back in the business of sending astronauts to the moon. And Victor Glover delivered what might be the mission's most moving reflection during an Easter message on Flight Day 4, reminding people that they are also on a spaceship called Earth, created to give humanity a place to live in the universe. He told the world to trust him, that they are special in all of this emptiness. But nobody at NASA is celebrating yet. The real test is April 10th. That heat shield has to survive re-entry at 25,000 miles per hour, the fastest any crewed vehicle has ever attempted. If it holds, Artemis II proves that humans can ride the SLS and Orion to the moon and come back safely. And that proof opens the door to Artemis III, the mission that will put boots on the lunar surface for the first time since December 1972. After that comes Artemis IV, which will deliver pieces of a small space station called Gateway into lunar orbit. The entire Artemis program is a chain, and Artemis II is the link that has to hold for everything else to work. Right now, 4 people are on the far side of the moon. A retired fighter pilot, a test pilot who broke barriers, a polar researcher who set endurance records, and a Canadian whose first space flight is a trip around the moon. Today they fly behind it into silence, farther from home than any human has ever gone. And in 4 days, they either come home safely or they do not. The whole world is watching.